Welcome to episode 250 of the Refuse-Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse-Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. This is also our 5-year anniversary. 5 years of sounding the alarm, digging beneath the headlines, and amplifying the voices of resistance against the American fascist threat. Through it all, you've been with us. You've listened, shared, debated, organized, protested, donated, and much more. And now, as Trump tightens his grip and the stakes get even higher, we need you more than ever. 5 years ago, we launched this show to break through the lies, the normalization, and the paralysis, to demand Trump Pence out now. And each week, we brought you voices of resistance and clarity to face a threat that now, 5 years later, many still deny or downplay. I want to thank every one of you who's been with us, whether since day one with Inside, Without Now, or just our last episode, for refusing to become numb, for refusing to look away, and for refusing to accept a fascist America in the name of humanity. 5 years ago, this show was born out of necessity. Wasn't some kind of branding exercise, a side project, wasn't some COVID-era hobby. It was, and still is, a vital part of building a movement with the clarity, courage, community, and strategy needed to stop a fascist America, right now with the very urgent mission of building a nonviolent but determined, sustained, and growing mass movement demanding the Trump fascist regime must go now and not stopping until that demand is won. And here's the thing with this show. We don't just talk about the problem. We provide people with visions, plans, resources, inspiration, and yes, the challenge to act together. And we do so while bringing people together of different perspectives and backgrounds and expertise, all united over the shared commitment to end this nightmare. Over these years, we've exposed the fascist threat embodied in the Trump regime and the MAGA movement, amplifying the voices of those who refuse to look away or stand aside. We've seen people rise in moments of outrage, sometimes with real power and courage. But still, in 2025, nearly the summer of 2025, too many cling to illusions that we can ride this out, slow it down, and swing things back with the next election. Gessen, writing for the New York Times, powerfully speaks to the normalization in their latest New York Times opinion piece titled "Beware, we are entering a new phase of the Trump era." The piece is linked in the show notes. They write, quote, "We humans are stability-seeking creatures. Getting accustomed to what used to seem unthinkable can feel like an accomplishment. And when the unthinkable recedes at least a bit, when someone gets released from detention, as the Columbia University student Mohsen Madawi was a few weeks ago, or some particularly egregious proposal is withdrawn or blocked by the courts, as the ban on international students at Harvard has been, at least temporarily, it's easy to mistake it for proof that the dark times are ending. But these comparatively small victories don't alter the direction of our transformation. They don't even slow it down measurably. Even while they appeal to our deep need to normalize, they create the sense that there is more air to breathe and more room to act than there was yesterday. And so, just when we most need to act, while there is indeed room for action and some momentum to the resistance, we tend to be lulled into complacency by the sense of relief on the one hand and boredom on the other," end quote. But the last 4 months have made clear that we are not dealing with anything normal, politics as usual, that this is not just the worst of a Republican administration. We are living through a rapid consolidation of fascist power. Trump and his movement are not waiting. They are moving with accelerating speed to impose a full, openly white supremacist, openly misogynist, openly xenophobic, openly Christian fascist regime. State violence is intensifying. Political opponents are being criminalized. Scott Pelley powerfully warned graduates of this danger in his commencement speech, which has gone viral. His commencement speech was given at Wake Forest this past week. Have a listen to this clip.
But in this moment, this morning, our sacred rule of law is under attack. Journalism is under attack. Universities are under attack. Freedom of speech is under attack, and insidious fear is reaching through our schools, our businesses, our homes, and into our private thoughts. The fear to speak in America. Power can rewrite history with grotesque, false narratives. They can make criminals heroes and heroes criminals. Power can change the definition of the words we use to describe reality. Diversity is now described as illegal. Equity is to be shunned. Inclusion is a dirty word. This is an old playbook, my friends. There's nothing new in this.
While it is nothing new in that we know the playbook, these are different circumstances than when Hitler rose to power, as we live in a time of escalating environmental catastrophe and real immediate danger of direct warfare between the US and other nuclear-armed powers. The direction is set, the momentum is growing, and the window to stop this is narrowing by the day. Too many still see the crisis as a series of outrages to protest or policies to reverse in isolation, rather than recognizing the fascist direction, momentum, and the qualitative transformation being hammered into place. The Trump regime and the MAGA movement aren't simply a threat that can be slowed or managed. They must be fully repudiated, and yes, defeated, and yes, now. One of the biggest lessons we've seen time and time again from fascist regimes worldwide is there becomes a time when it is too late. And while that window is narrowing by the day, we are not there, my peeps, not yet. Now is the time for mass, sustained, nonviolent resistance from below. For 5 years, this pod has been a place where I hope you've been able to hear the truth and act on it. That mission, let's be real, has never been more urgent. There remains a power sat on and undermined, underestimated, and ignored, but a power of tens of millions that hate Trump, that hate this regime and everything that they stand for, that can and must be awakened. A power that together we must awaken. A force that is powerful enough, if we are asserted ourselves, to become an ungovernable people who will not stop, who will not rest until this regime is removed from power. This podcast has always been about sounding the alarm and calling people to act on what they know to be true. That remains our mission, and one we need you with us to fight for. Today, we are talking about Donald. I need the kind of generals that Hitler had, Trump's military parade, a parade that must be opposed. But first, we want to share 2 reflections from national leaders of Refuse-Fascism on the 250th episode and 5th anniversary, Coco Das and Paul Street. Have a listen in that order.
This is Coco Das of the editorial board of Refuse-Fascism.org. It is the 5-year anniversary and 250th episode of the Refuse-Fascism podcast. For 5 years, your host, Sam Goldman, has been discussing the Trump GOP MAGA-led American fascism that has risen to the highest levels of power once again, this time far more hardened, organized, lawless, and determined. Sam has been hearing from scholars and activists about what animates this fascist movement, its lines of attack, its values, its alliances and divisions, and what the people must do to stop it. Sam's weekly recap of the latest fascist developments are shocking and essential because the dizzying speed of their racist, misogynist, xenophobic assaults is meant to make people stop paying attention. The Refuse-Fascism podcast refuses to stop paying attention and refuses to accept a fascist America. So everyone listening to this episode, whether you've been with us for 5 years or 5 weeks, thank you. All of us have a special responsibility now to act, to get everyone you know who hates what is happening to tune into the Refuse-Fascism podcast instead of tuning out of politics and the news. Donate or become a patron so that thousands more can find this podcast and join a growing community of people who have the knowledge and the tools to wage the struggle that is needed to defeat this fascism. Join the movement to stop the Trump regime from consolidating power. Go to refusefascism.org and sign up. Get on a mission, an urgent mission, to unite all who can be united, from many different backgrounds and political perspectives, in mass nonviolent protest and resistance in the streets and throughout society, to demand Trump must go now, not stopping until our demand is met. We are serious about driving this fascism out of power and getting to a time when this podcast is obsolete. But for now, it could not be more necessary, and we're lucky to have it. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The Trump fascist regime must go now.
Do you want to know what time it is, historically speaking? Do you also want to determine with others what we must and can do to meet the current moment? How we can defend and advance prospects for a decent and liberating people's future on a safe, life-sustaining planet? Of course you do. Where to start? Here's a secret pro tip. There is no better source of action-oriented knowledge and inspiration along these lines right now than the remarkable weekly Refuse-Fascism podcast hosted by Samantha Goldman. Now approaching its 250th episode, this podcast is simply indispensable. It is an unparalleled source of information on and analysis of the Trump fascist movement that has taken power atop the world's most powerful country a second and far more lethal time. The Refuse-Fascism podcast is also a vital source of inspiration, pointing us towards determined collective action to create a political crisis leading to the removal of the Trump fascist regime. Please become both a regular listener and a paid supporter of this extraordinary resource, and please join Samantha Goldman and the whole Refuse-Fascism podcast team in saying loud and clear, in the name of humanity, we refuse a fascist America.
Support the show, become a patron for $2 a month, and ask 5 friends to join you on this special episode, or become a sustainer for $25 a month with more perks. Visit patreon.com/refusefascism, or make a one-time gift of $50. Or if it is within reach, give $250 for the 250th episode. Visit refusefascism.org/donate or Venmo refuse-fascism. As you know, this is an independent, all-volunteer podcast, and we couldn't do this work without you.
In the name of humanity! We refuse to accept! A fascist America!
Since you're listening to this podcast and not living under a rock, you know that on Saturday, June 14th, just a little under 2 weeks away from now, Trump is weaponizing the Army's 250th anniversary into a military loyalty parade, a fascist show of force that must be opposed. And I'm so glad to share with you that Refuse-Fascism is calling for demonstrations in D.C. and yes, all over the country to say the Trump fascist regime must go now. Join in D.C. on Saturday, June 14th at 1 p.m. at Logan Circle and march to the White House. Right now, we're being ruled by a fascist regime. It is rapidly moving to cement into place a fascist America. Let's look at just some of the developments from this past week in regards to 2 key pillars right now: attacks on immigrants and the judiciary. Since our last episode, the regime has expanded their attack on immigrants, with Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller demanding ICE triple the daily arrests of immigrants to arrest 3,000 people a day. The fascist-stacked Supreme Court has greenlit the Trump regime to end legal status for 500,000 immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Marco Rubio announced this week that the U.S. will, quote-unquote, aggressively begin revoking visas held by Chinese students. ICE is targeting non-citizens for arrest while they appear for their proceedings in immigration court. Reports indicate that government attorneys who are employed within ICE are being told to request dismissals of cases from immigration judges. And then, once a person's case was dismissed, these ICE agents arrest the non-citizen. Given the dismissal of the immigration court proceedings, ICE's goal is to place them into quote-unquote expedited removal. This is a fast-track process where low-level immigration officers, not immigration judges, can order a person removed. This while DHS rapidly expands aggressive collaboration with state and local police. The regime now has flown Southeast Asian refugees to South Sudan, expanding their horrifying axis of quote-unquote resettlement. They've carried out a massive operation arresting over 100 refugees in the center of power in Washington, D.C., and they've used this battering ram of immigration enforcement to go after anyone who stands in their way. They have officially charged a U.S. Representative, LaMonica McIver, as we talked about before, with assaulting a federal officer stemming from ICE's brutal and illegitimate arrest of Newark Mayor Ras Baraka. Just yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a list of quote-unquote non-compliant jurisdictions that the regime claims are impeding their efforts. This list is an open threat directed at entire municipalities full of people who oppose Trump's policies. This is the logic of fascism, where the injustice and cruelty at the heart of their program will not be contained or hidden, but instead reshapes all of society. All this with Trump's budget passing the House, promising major escalation in funds devoted to his mass deportation promise, which is a promise of ethnic cleansing. And in terms of attacks on the judiciary, on Monday morning, in an all-cap social media post, Trump wished a happy Memorial Day to, quote, U.S.-hating judges who suffer from an ideology that is sick and very dangerous for our country, end quote, asking SCOTUS, again in all caps, of course, quote, save us from the decisions of the monsters who want our country to go to hell, end quote. Who are the monsters? Of course not those arresting high school students who show up for immigration court or deporting 4-year-old cancer patients to their death, but the federal district court judges who have ruled against Trump and the regime. As reported on by the Wall Street Journal, you now have U.S. federal judges considering creating their own armed security force as threats mount. Marshals data shows an intense spike in threats against federal judges, as reported on by the New York Times. In the 5-month period leading up to March 1st of this year, 80 individual judges received threats. Then, over the next 6 weeks, an additional 162 judges received threats. This spike coincided with a flood of fascist threats, often from Trump himself, criticizing judges who ruled against the regime, and in some cases, calling on Congress to impeach them. The total number threatened this fiscal year was 277 judges, 1/3 of the judiciary. This past week, in the wake of federal judges blocking Trump's tariffs, Stephen Miller, Caroline Leavitt, and Trump himself went hard after the judiciary in the court of public opinion. As Axios reported, Miller shared a post Thursday on social media with images and biographies of 3 judges who ruled that the president doesn't have the authority to impose sweeping global tariffs. Quote unquote, we are living under judicial tyranny, Miller wrote. The fascist framing was put bluntly by Leavitt on Thursday when she said, quote, President Trump had more injunctions in 1 full month of office in February than Joe Biden had in 3 years, end quote. This fact is clearly a result of Trump doing the illegal, blatantly illegal. But to them, these fascists, this is evidence of a conspiracy against them. This isn't just a propaganda war, though. Trump's budget, which passed the House last week, somehow involves imposing restrictions on the judiciary's ability to issue injunctions to stop Trump's illegal actions in the course of legal proceedings. Trump's screed against the Federalist Society underlies a shift to even more fully fascist litmus tests for judge appointments, including from organizations such as the American Family Association Action Center for Judicial Renewal, which explicitly goes through potential appointments' religious history and will not endorse anyone who isn't their cruel brand of Christian. Again, we gotta emphasize, this fascism must be defeated. The regime must be driven from power through nonviolent but relentless protests of millions before it becomes too late, before all the avenues of redress, of protest get cut off right now, right frickin' now, right fucking now. We must act.
Trump must go now. 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 Trump must go now.
Hitler's 50th birthday was marked by a military parade in April 1939. It was organized by the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. 5 months later, Nazi Germany invaded Poland.
It is April 1939, and Berlin has been transformed into a city of spectacle. The world watches with bated breath as Adolf Hitler, the Führer of Nazi Germany, celebrates his 50th birthday, not with cakes and candles, but with a chilling display of military might. The streets are lined with thousands of troops, their boots striking the ground in perfect unison, goose-stepping in a terrifying rhythm that echoes through the heart of the city. At the center of this orchestrated show of force stands Hitler himself, his figure rigid on the reviewing stand. The Führer's eyes are cold, surveying the immense power amassed before him. German officers, equally stiff, stand beside him, their hands raised in the unmistakable Nazi salute, mirroring Hitler's unwavering arm. The salute is not just a gesture of loyalty, it is a statement of total submission to the man who now controls Germany's fate.
On Saturday, June 14th, Trump's birthday, he has called for a military parade in Washington, D.C. This is a major move to create an army loyal not to the rule of law, but to Trump personally, with all the racism, misogyny, and MAGA America First hate this involves. On this day, in Washington, D.C., and in protests across the country, we gotta ring out with, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Each day sees new outrages against the rule of law, new threats against Trump's quote-unquote enemies. Immigrants snatched out of cars while their children wail in terror, trans people vilified, universities bludgeoned, judges and politicians threatened and arrested, law firms blackmailed. Meanwhile, Trump bullies the world. This fascist Trump regime has gotta go. Reaction, revenge, and hypocrisy saturate society. The hard-won rights and respect that people shed blood for, ridiculed, reversed. MAGA leaders give Nazi salutes, while the regime slanders protesters against genocide in Gaza as quote-unquote anti-Semitic. The big lie is on steroids. Truth, whatever the fascists say it is, cruelty, corruption, and spectacle are glorified, while human decency is mocked. This fascism has deadly momentum and focused intent. Let's be clear, waiting for the 2026 elections banks on illusion at a time when illusions are the deadliest narcotic of all. The situation demands of us the fiercest urgency of now. Trump's June 14th military parade is designed to send a message of intimidation and fear here and around the world. It must be opposed. We must oppose it. With that, we're sharing a segment of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show that aired on Thursday, May 29th with hosts Annie Day and Sansara Taylor. Sansara is a founder of Refuse-Fascism.org and a national leader of Refuse-Fascism. They discuss more about the Nazification of the military and the turning point that this military parade represents and the need for it to be decisively opposed.
Let's start with Steve Bannon, the fascist ideologue and architect, talking about just this.
What is one thing you want to see in the next 100 days?
Just more of the double down, more of the same. I do want to see there's going to be a confrontation. I think the convergence of the financial issue of the big, beautiful bill, particularly of spending cuts, and the simultaneously constitutional crisis that we're hurtling to is going to make this summer a summer like no other.
Think about that. They intend to double down in their fascism, and you're seeing it every day. ICE raids in courthouses, Trump attacking, threatening high school age trans athletes, arresting judges and congresspeople and mayors. And yes, in each case, there is significant protest and outrage. But what is missing, what people need to understand, is that we cannot fight this fascism item by item, outrage by outrage. We have to recognize that this regime has to be driven from power, that the single unifying demand that has to reverberate in the streets and in every institution has to be the Trump fascist regime must go now.
The reason this is so important is Trump has made clear that as long as he's in power, he is going to bulldoze over any obstacle. That's what Steve Bannon was talking about, but that's what Trump has demonstrated. The courts tell him you can't deport these people. He does it anyhow. The Supreme Court says you got to bring Abrego Garcia back. Ignored. He is not letting any obstacle stand in his way, and Congress is not stopping him. There's no institution, even the institution standing up against him. They can only hold out for so long. Harvard, we're rooting for you. But Trump is circling, tightening the noose on them. There's got to be an offense from every corner of society demanding the removal of this regime and not stopping. Yes, nonviolent, but ferocious, determined, relentless, and growing struggle. And it has to take a leap soon. So one of the things we want to talk about right now is a major leap in the Nazification of this society, a major leap towards fascism happening on June 14th. This is Trump's birthday. It's the 250th anniversary of the U.S. military, and it is the occasion on which Donald Trump is throwing himself a fascist military parade through the streets of D.C.
That's right. Almost 7,000 soldiers are going to be marching with tanks, with Apache helicopters flying overhead. And it's all leading up to the point where they're going to give Trump a flag as part of the proceedings of the day.
Just to really take stock in what this means, the military is the iron backbone of the state. It is the fighting force. It is enforcing the U.S. military, the U.S. power and domination throughout the world. And it is a concentration of what kind of country, what kind of society, what kind of ethos, what kind of morality this country is going to have. The U.S. military has carried out war crimes and crimes against humanity from the founding of this country with George Washington and the Crusades and starvation inflicted on Native peoples and massacres, down to the Vietnam War and the crimes against humanity and the millions who were slaughtered there by the U.S., to the criminal war on terror, Iraq war, all of these things, to right now with the backing of the genocide in Gaza. It's been a bloody history. But one thing that has existed up till now is the U.S. military has been loyal to the system as a whole. It has been nonpartisan in that sense. And during Trump's first regime, he tried to throw himself a military parade, and really reactionary, high-powered generals, U.S. military generals, stopped him. James Mad Dog Mattis, who was a war criminal. He led the Battle of Fallujah in the Iraq War, the Second Iraq War. This is a battle where they wrapped the entire city in barbed wire and told people, leave town or die, and they shot everything that moved, anybody who didn't leave. So he's a war criminal. Donald Trump wanted to throw himself a military parade during the first Trump regime. James Mattis said no. He said, I would rather drink acid than let Trump throw himself a military parade. Now, why did he do this? Again, he wanted to preserve the U.S. military being loyal to the rule of law and the Constitution, not to an individual fascist leader and an ideological white supremacist, openly MAGA movement. And there's nobody now to stop Trump. He's going forward with this.
And this is not just symbolic. I mean, Trump has been moving since day one to Nazify the military. I mean, look at who he put as defense secretary. Who he appointed as defense secretary is this guy, Pete Hegseth, who is an open Christian fascist.
This is precisely where I need to be. And I think exactly where we need to be as a nation at this moment, in prayer, on bended knee, recognizing the providence of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Knowing that there's an author in heaven overseeing all of this, who's underwritten all of it for us on the cross, gives me the strength to proceed and to look out at this audience and know there are so many others online here at the Defense Department who share that understanding of appealing to heaven for that guidance, for that wisdom, for that courage. Gives me strength.
Who has fought for years to be able to have the military openly violate any rules of law, has worked to get people who'd been convicted of war crimes to be pardoned by Trump, which he did all throughout Trump 1.0, who said that any ability, any way in which you have to abide by international laws against war crimes is why the U.S. has not won a war since World War II. Hegseth wrote a book called American Crusades, and he upholds the crusades that were waged in the 11th century by the Catholic Church. This is the time where they waged, basically holy wars against anybody that the Catholic Church deemed infidels. And what does Hegseth say in his book called American Crusade? Is he basically envisions a war on leftists in the U.S. as a modern day crusade. And he writes, this time in our history calls for an American crusade. Yes, a holy war for the righteous cause of human freedom. And what he means as human freedom is an openly theocratic, openly male supremacist, white supremacist society that he intends to enforce through violence.
I just want to underscore, that's a chilling quote. Hegseth is talking about a crusade, a holy war on U.S. soil. And when he talks about radical leftists, they cast a very wide net when they talk about radical leftists. They're talking about a judge appointed by Ronald Reagan, in their view, is a lunatic radical leftist. So this is a very serious and dangerous situation. This is what they're marching through D.C., U.S. soil, military parade on June 14th. And this is why it's going to be opposed. Trump has already purged the leadership of the military, of black leaders, of women leaders, of anybody who even gave lip service to overcoming racial and gender discrimination within the military. They have planned a purge of trans troops on June 6th, the first week of Pride Month. I want you to listen to what Donald Trump said at West Point during a commencement address he gave this past week.
They sent our warriors on nation-building crusades to nations that wanted nothing to do with us, led by leaders that didn't have a clue in distant lands, while abusing our soldiers with absurd ideological experiments here and at home. All of that's ended. You know that. All of it's ended. It's ended, strongly ended. They're not even allowed to think about it anymore.
Think about that. He's saying you won't even be allowed to think, not even allowed to think about overcoming gender and racial discrimination. He is remolding this military to be an actively, openly white supremacist, male supremacist, Christian fascist fighting force loyal to him, above the rule of law, not bound by the Constitution, and purged of any other authority who would stand in his way. And this is why it is so important. It is so important that there are protests that have been called across the country on this day. Indivisible has called for protests. Other groups are joining with it. Over 700 cities already are planning protests under the banner, No Kings. And this is righteous and it's important. But we also have to inject into these protests, it is crucial, the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now. This is not just a vanity project of Trump trying to become a king. This is a Nazification of the military and a leap towards fascist consolidation in this country. And the regime has to be called out as a whole. The fascism has to be opposed, and it has to be done nationwide, but it also has to be done in Washington, D.C., where this is going down.
Yeah, and it really matters that this demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now is manifest all across the country as a determined sense of mission, and that it manifests in the streets of Washington, D.C., while these fascists are tromping through the Capitol with their military. This is why it's really important that Refuse-Fascism is calling for uniting with these protests across the country and calling for protests in D.C. itself on June 14th. There has to be a bold and serious repudiation of this Nazification of the military and Trump's, celebratory parade. Refuse-Fascism has gotten a permit. It's going to be a determined protest. It's going to be a nonviolent protest. It's going to be early in the day, but it is going to be in the streets of DC to send this message so that all across the country that there is a split screen when the newspapers cover this, when the nightly news covers this. There has to be, the pictures of protests all across the country, and there has to be the sense and the image of the forces in the streets of DC saying, no, we are not going to allow this to go down. So let me ask you, Sansara, Indivisible, one of the groups that have called this No King's Day, has said that they've called for these national protests for everywhere but DC. And so Refuse-Fascism is uniting with that, but also saying, no, it also has to be in DC. And I'd like you to speak to, I think some of the logic of this is, or what people say anyway, is if we protest them in the streets, it will give Trump an excuse to come down with a repression, or this might mean that they'll call for martial law. How would you answer that?
Well, you want to see martial law advance, you let a military parade headed by Donald Trump go unopposed in the seat of power. You need to stand up to this. Yes. We're calling for nonviolent protest, Refuse-Fascism is, and we're not looking for a confrontation, but there does have to be a political opposition right there in the seat of power standing up to this, because the more you bow down, the more you cower and stand away from taking this on directly, the more it advances. And so it's righteous and it's really important. I mean, it's so important that there's protests nationwide, and we need more of them, and we support them, and people should go out to them. RevCom should go out to them. People with Refuse-Fascism should go out to them. Bring the slogan, the Trump fascist regime must go now, everywhere. But we do have to be in D.C., and we have to be building up strength in D.C., not just on June 14th, but going forward. We need a movement that's going to unseat this regime through mass nonviolent political protest and sustained struggle. And it's going to have a major center of struggle in D.C. So we have to be doing this now, and it has to be growing all summer long.
I mean, I think it's a heavy thing, because I think people are confronting, when we think about the fascism and what we're facing, there's a lot of fear, and that's understandable. But I think it's important to think about the actual danger of what we're facing and what it will mean for the people of the world if we allow this fascism to consolidate. And in the face of that, the need for heroism, the need for self-sacrificing courage, and the need to come together. And actually, this is some of the power of the call from Refuse-Fascism is in our numbers, to come together, to have each other's backs, to have the backs of the people of the world, and raise the slogan, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.
Another thing that's very important about being in D.C. protesting and nationwide is, if you think about the U.S. military and who makes it up, it is over 40% people of color. It's over 20% women. And there's other people in the military who these changes, this Nazification, does not sit well with them. There are people for whom they may find ways to give expression to their opposition, who may not feel so ready and willing to carry out illegal, unconstitutional orders, to carry out war crimes, to be unleashed on U.S. soil against the Constitution. But it's going to matter if there's opposition in society calling this out and calling out the regime as a whole. The more powerful the resistance is in the streets, the more it's going to repolarize every institution and give backing to those who are against this, to find the ways to stand up to it. And that's part of what comes together and could come together from the street, and then echoing and ricocheting in the halls of power and within every institution to create the kind of political crisis where the regime is forced out. We don't know exactly how that's going to happen, and that's not going to happen on June 4th. We're not predicting that on June 14th, but we have to be moving towards that. And we have to be raising the demand, and we have to be rallying people's courage and their sustained outpourings in opposition. And so June 14th, we have to make a leap in this. That's what we are fighting for and calling on everybody to be part of.
Yeah, so to put it back, not in the way Bannon means, just the opposite, but it does have to be a summer like no other. So go to refusefascism.org, sign up, get organized wherever you are, and if you're anywhere near DC, get to DC.
Judith Levine, writing for The Guardian, issued a very important warning. Quote, "The media are focused on the price tag, potholes and the impending pump, on tensions between the blue city of Washington and the red Capitol, and on the decimation of veterans' healthcare, housing, and pensions, while the administration throws $25 million to $45 million at a circus of war. All are important parts of the story, yet commentary is muted and the debate mischaracterized as normal political discourse. The horrific point is missed. The spectacle of a massive show of military might before a president who behaves like a dictator and views the armed forces as his personal foot soldiers evinces memories of the worst totalitarian regimes. History may mark 14 June 2025 as the ceremonial birth of a new American fascism," end quote. And just to add a little bit more on Hegseth from this past week, he issued on Memorial Day a recruitment video for the military that started with a voiceover of him saying, "No more distractions, no more electric tanks, no more gender confusion, no more climate change worship. We are laser focused on our mission of war fighting." This while he restricts press access to the Pentagon, saying journalists will be required to sign a pledge, and held Christian prayer and worship services as defense secretary in the Pentagon's auditorium during working hours, in which President Trump was praised as a divinely appointed leader. It was standing room only. It ran for 30 minutes, and the pastor of Hegseth Church in Tennessee was the main speaker. So bringing it home. Anyone that can get to DC should join with us and others at 1 p.m. at Logan Circle. Participate in a nonviolent march to the White House. Let us show the world that we will not shrink from our responsibility to act in the name of humanity, to refuse to accept a fascist America. No, the Capitol can't be ceded to Trump's fascist parade. Instead, our protest must be an urgent call to all that standing aside, accommodating, or appeasing a fascist regime is the road to great horrors. This must be a time of courage and determination. And yes, Refuse-Fascism calls on people everywhere to join with the No Kings Day protests across the country and raise this same simple, powerful, and true message: Trump must go now. Find a link to these protests in the show notes, along with resources to get out the demand, Trump must go now. Thanks for listening to Refuse-Fascism. Every week, give or take for 5 years, we've brought you analysis of the growing danger of American fascism, voices from the front lines of resistance, and calls to act, not just to comment on the horror, but to stop it. And today, as Trump marches us closer toward full-out fascist consolidation, this show and you are needed more than ever. This podcast isn't just commentary, it's a tool for resistance, but only with the support and involvement of people like you. So if it's helped you clarify what you're up against and what's needed to stop it, help us continue by donating today at refusefascism.org. Just hit that donate button, by becoming a patron at patreon.com/refusefascism, and of course, sharing the show with others. And join us in the streets on Saturday, June 14th. We will also be joining with American opposition on Saturday, June 7th, for a protest outside the White House at 11 a.m., a week before the military parade, raising the Trump must go now demand and urging others to join the next week. We'll gather Lafayette Square, June 7th at 11 a.m. There are times in history when people must do the hard thing, when staying home, staying silent, or just hoping for the best becomes not only complicity, but enters the realm of collaboration. This is one of those times. So as we mark this 250th episode in 5 years, I want to say to every listener who has refused to back down, thank you. Now, let's write the next chapter together. Thanks to everyone who makes the show possible, our patrons, our production team, Mark Tinkelman, Richie Marini, Lena Thorne. Thanks as well to our transcription team. We'll be back next Sunday. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.